You're almost never bored anymore. Not truly bored in the old sense of the word, where there was genuinely nothing to do and no way to change that. Now there's always something within reach, a feed, a show, a message, a video that will begin before the previous one even finishes. The opportunity to be bored has been almost entirely engineered out of daily life. And this is frequently presented as progress. What it may actually be is a real loss you haven't yet fully accounted for. Boredom has been studied seriously as a psychological state for decades. And what researchers have found consistently contradicts the intuitive sense that boredom is simply the absence of something interesting. It is not a neutral gap. It is an active state with a specific function, a distinct neural signature, and measurable consequences when it is prevented from occurring. What boredom signals, what it produces, and what happens to the mind that never experiences it are all questions with answers that tend to surprise people the first time they encounter them. The psychological definition of boredom centers on a mismatch between mental arousal and available stimulation. You want to be engaged. You are not. The mind has energy it cannot direct, attention it cannot anchor. Researchers describe this as an aversive state of wanting, specifically wanting something meaningful to do and finding nothing that qualifies. This is why boredom feels uncomfortable in a way that is different from relaxation or tiredness. You're not depleted. You're actively searching. That search is the key. Boredom evolved, most researchers believe, as a motivational signal. It is the brain's way of announcing that the current situation is not providing enough cognitive stimulation or meaningful engagement, and that something should change. In this sense, boredom is not the problem. It is the alarm that draws attention to a problem. An organism that felt comfortable doing nothing for extended periods would have been at an evolutionary disadvantage compared to one that felt restless and redirected that restlessness toward exploration, creativity, or problem solving. The discomfort of boredom is the mechanism. The action it produces is the point. This is why laboratory studies consistently show that people emerging from periods of induced boredom perform better on subsequent tests of creative thinking. The experience of having an understimulated mind that wants engagement appears to prime the brain for divergent thought, the kind of thinking that generates novel connections rather than following established pathways. Boredom, in this reading, is not something that precedes creativity as its opposite, but something that actively produces the conditions for it. The restless mind looking for something to do is precisely the mind in the posture most receptive to new ideas. The neuroscience adds another layer. When the brain has no specific task demanding focused attention, it does not go quiet. It activates a network of regions known as the default mode network, which is associated with self-referential thought, mental time travel, social cognition, and imaginative simulation. This is the network that runs when you daydream, when you think about other people, when you rehearse future conversations, when you reflect on past experiences, when you construct hypothetical scenarios. Far from being idle, the brain in this mode is doing some of its most sophisticated and distinctly human work. Boredom, by withdrawing external stimulation, creates the conditions for that network to operate freely. The problem is that most people find boredom so aversive that they escape it before it can do anything useful. A widely cited study found that a significant portion of participants, when left alone in a room with nothing to do, chose to administer mild electric shocks to themselves rather than simply sit with their thoughts. The escape from boredom was preferred over physical discomfort. This gives some indication of how strongly the modern mind resists unstructured mental time, and of how rarely that resistance is examined or questioned. The consequences of never being bored are not hypothetical. Researchers studying the relationship between chronic stimulation and attention have found that the constant availability of novel content may be degrading the brain's capacity to sustain engagement with things that do not immediately deliver reward. When the threshold for stimulation is perpetually met by an external supply, the brain's tolerance adjusts upward. Things that would previously have been interesting enough become insufficient. Boredom arrives faster, feels more intolerable, and drives the person toward higher intensity stimulation in a cycle that is difficult to interrupt once established. The attempt to eliminate boredom may be producing more of it. There is also a relationship between boredom and self-knowledge that receives almost no popular attention. Because the default mode network is active during boredom, and because that network handles self-reflective thought, the person who regularly allows themselves to be bored has more opportunities to think about their own life, their values, their direction, what they want, what is missing, what matters. These are not comfortable thoughts in many cases, which may be part of why avoiding boredom feels so natural. But the person who never sits with an understimulated mind is also a person who rarely encounters themselves in an unmediated way. All access to the self is filtered through content, through tasks, through the noise of constant engagement. The quieter signal of what the self actually thinks and wants has no space to become audible. Children who are allowed to be bored without immediate rescue develop something that researchers call self-directed play, the capacity to generate their own internal engagement independent of external provision. This is considered an important developmental marker associated with imagination, intrinsic motivation, and the ability to tolerate delay. The adults those children become tend to be better at sustaining attention, more comfortable with ambiguity, and more capable of generating their own sense of meaning. The adults who were never allowed to simply be bored, who were always handed something, often find themselves dependent on external stimulation in ways that are difficult to trace back to their origin. None of this means boredom is always productive or that every moment of restlessness should be cherished. Chronic boredom, boredom that persists despite genuine effort to change the situation, is associated with depression, risk-taking, and reduced well-being. The kind of boredom being discussed here is situational, temporary, and most importantly, tolerated rather than immediately fled. It is the gap between finishing one thing and finding another, the 10 minutes without a phone, the journey without earphones, the silence before sleep that is not immediately filled. These are not experiences of deprivation. They are intervals in which the brain gets to do something it was designed to do and now so rarely gets the chance.